Bosses of Reddit. What the worst interview you've seen? Story 1 had a guy who interviewed for a position, seemed to do okay in the actual interview. But when he was not selected for the position, he sent us an invoice of a few $1,000s. He charged us his normal hourly rate for his time and billed us for 50 hours. The interview was 30 minutes over the phone with a recruiter and 1 hour on site. He drove to the office, which only took him about 30 minutes to drive. He did itemize the bill for us, and the bulk of those hours were for preparation. We did not pay him. He tried to insist we pay him. We showed our lawyers, who just laughed, so we still did not pay him. The best part was he was interviewing for an HR position. Story 2, one time an applicant told me that he was temporarily placed in charge of a team. And one of the team members spoke mostly French, so he told him to learn English or get the out of here, and then subsequently sent him home when he did not immediately learn English. The question was, tell me about a time that you worked well under loose supervision. Story 3, when my dad was going through applications, in a reason for leaving last job part, a man wrote that he had shot his previous boss in the head. His PO had told him to be honest. Story 4, so this guy went through 5 to 60-minute interviews, DevOps role. I thought he was great and was ready to hire him. Just as a formally, I asked him why boss to interview him. After 15 minutes, she walks out and tells us to send him home. This is what he asked her, I'm not. But I know a lot of other people think women aren't great engineers, so my question is, how is it that you go into such a high-level position? Was it luck? Why would you ever ask that? Story 5, my old boss told me that one of the applicants put Jesus Christ as a reference. He asked him, how would we contact your reference? Since the applicant didn't put any contact info for Jesus, and my old boss was curious on how he will answer. Apparently, the applicant told him like this, and then he started praying. I forgot to ask him if he got the job, or not, since I couldn't stop laughing. Story 6, a woman was about 15 years older than I was and clearly didn't understand that I was the one actually interviewing her for the job. This was an engineering position on my team, making $175K. She was very candid with me regarding her overall personality and actually put her purse on her lap at one point and doing her makeup while we were talking. I guess she thought I was the secretary and she was making small talk before meeting with my boss. Story 7, interviewer. So what qualities can you bring to the team? Applicant, I don't know. Interviewer, well, what do you consider yourself good at? Applicant, I don't know. Interviewer, okay, why did you apply to the position? Applicant, they told me to. Interviewer, who told you to apply? Applicant, I don't know. Story 8, back when I was HR manager for a market research firm. One of the most awkward interviews was with my candidate and his mother. This 19-year-old, who apparently had previous work experience in customer service, brought his mother into the interview with him. I politely questioned his mother as to the reasoning of her joining in on the interview, and I was told, I'm just making sure this is the right company for him and making sure you're asking fair questions. I decided to roll with it. This is the most interesting thing I've had all week. So I asked my first question. She answered for him. I politely explained that the interviews I conduct are with the candidate only unless special accommodations are required. I was told I'm not going anywhere. I thanked them both for coming out and explained that the position requires problem solving and critical thinking on an individual level. Unless I am hiring the both of them under one salary working together as a full-time equivalent, this wouldn't work. I was then told I would be sued, and to myself. Story 9, I once interviewed a guy for a work-study position at a college radio station. The position was for 10 hours a week as a sports reporter. I told him that he would sometimes have to carry the equipment for the remote broadcast of sports, and he immediately took his shoe and sock off and put his foot on the table to show me a scar on his foot. Tells me that he has a plate in his foot, and sometimes it hurts, and he wouldn't be able to carry heavy things when it was hurting. TLDR, this dude put his bare foot on a table in a job interview. Story 10, I've got tons of these. This one is my current favorite. I had a guy come in for a CDL and site work, truck driving, and earth-moving equipment position. After the initial pleasantries, he went on to inform me that he didn't like small talk. His pet peeve is people who socialize too much on the job when there's work to be done. He likes to get right to it and get hammering away on that work. He just doesn't understand these people who just talk instead of getting on with it. Not like him. He's not interested in chatting, no. He's got a better work ethic than these kids, and he's not going to stand around gabbing about nothing when time is wasting, etc., etc., etc. He went on like that, no exaggeration, for an hour and 20 minutes, a solid hour and a half, including the initial question and answer bit at the beginning. I wasn't even mad, I just let him ramble on. At the end of it, he asked if he would be starting that day, or if I needed to do some of this paperwork stuff for him. He hadn't even filled out his pre-hire information forms. Absolutely majestic. Story 11, my dad made someone lose it in an interview. Interview happened in a cubicle near his, and the way the applicant sat, he had a direct line of sight to my dad while his coworker had her back to him. He sneezed, and his dentures flew out of his mouth, right in his garbage can. The guy lost it. He was screaming with laughter. The coworker was really pissed off that the candidate wasn't taking the interview seriously, especially since all he was laughing at was at my dad, fishing out something out of a basket. Edit wow. This blew up. Thanks for the gold. My dad's reaction to all this, probably cynic contentment or a combination of similar words, I guess. My dad's a joker heart. I can give you two examples that sticks out from stuff he told me about when I was a wee boy. There was this big skinhead at the corner of a street in Montreal harassing passersby for cigarettes back in the late 80s, early 90s. When people ignored him or didn't have cigarettes, had to intimidate them with insults. My dad was the recipient of such insults, but he decided to get even. He went to a shop nearby where he knew they were selling joke cigarettes, the kinds that blow up after a few puffs. He bought some, went to a convenience store to buy a real pack, inserted the joke cigs in the pack, and looped back to where there was luckily he was still there or around. So when asked for cigarettes, he fished in his pack and gave them to him. Guy said, "Thanks. You might be a fat, but you're cool." My dad told me that he walked away, and about a block or two away, he heard the pow sound, then heard a scream, "Where are you, you fat?" He dove into the nearest restaurant and waited it out, laughing. When my uncle had a piano recital, the whole family was there, and they decided to play a prank to his drunk uncle. So his brothers and cousins picked up his car. We're talking a 50 Esto 60 small clown car here, and they hid it a few blocks away. They had fun looking for the car with said drunk uncle after the recital until uncle gave up and accepted a ride home by a sober driver. Different times, I guess, too. Thanks for the well wishes. My dad has heart complications due to having been morbidly obese his whole life. Doctor told us he's young, 63, but has old people problems already due to his lifestyle being overweight, and having the diabetes can shorten a person's life by around 20 years, or so I've heard. They were talking about a bunch or problems, a heart valve transplant from a pig donor, possible cognitive damage. He's had a stroke in the past and can't feel half a side of his body, but can still move. Although when he holds a glass of water, he could drop it or break it since he can't feel how hard he's holding, for instance, etc. I will visit him tomorrow. I have 4 young kids to take care of, so can't visit as often as I can. Kids under 12 can't visit the hospital where I'm from, and we have few, if any, people to help support us for this and ask him about this. Thanks again, y'all. He'll be proud of having thousands of people find his little misfortune funny and might bring him out of his depression a little for that, which is really appreciated. Edit 2, haven't seen my father yet. I caught a cold Friday, and I didn't want to endanger his health. Last night, my daughter started stomach flu. So not going to see him for the next 48 hours. We'll update when I can. Edit 3, spoke to him on Easter weekend. He doesn't remember if the guy got the job or not. Sorry. I was sitting in on an interview, and this kid comes in with an open Hawaiian shirt and khakis. This was for a state job, mind you. When asked if he had any questions for us, he goes, "Yeah. Do you drug test?" And when walking him out of the building, he's looking at the pictures of all the heads of that department and stops at the only woman on there and goes, "When can I meet her? I want to know about her life." We immediately shredded his application. Story 12, in 2010, I conducted an interview with an applicant for a warehouse job. During the course of the interview, I mentioned my slight frustration about the grounded flights in Europe due to the volcano eruption in Iceland. Grounded flights meant we weren't receiving stock, and work was slow as a result. Applicant chimed in with, and I'm paraphrasing, "It's just another one of those things. He knows he's mad. Who's mad? God, he's mad. Just like that big tsunami a few years ago. God's mad. And he's letting us know we need to be more careful about what? Do you think this whole gay acceptance thing, God's mad and he's letting us know? We need to abide by the good book, or this kind of thing is just going to keep happening." Then he failed a drug test. Story 13, I interviewed an Italian girl who couldn't speak English. She had only moved to the country a few weeks prior, and I think this was her first interview, but it was all so painful. Nearly every question was answered with SI, pause. Yes, even questions that you shouldn't answer with a yes. I decided to be nice and go through all of my questions, but it was ridiculous. Like, I nearly called an Italian speaker to come and translate for us. If you had multiple asks coming for different parts of the business and they were all due today, but you couldn't finish them all in time, how would you try to balance this? SI, pause. Yes, no, say it's not possible to do them all by today. What would you do? SI, pause. Yes, so you don't have time to do them all. Would you see if you could reprioritize any of these? Or would you just not do them or something else? SI, pause. Yes, what I'm normally expecting here is something along the lines of you either asking to someone for more time, or looking for help from a colleague, or even speaking to your manager and asking for a list of priorities from them. Which of these would you be most likely to do? Longer pause. SI, pause. Yes, at the end of the interview, I was then just asking her general shoot the questions. She said she was currently learning English, so I asked her where she learning it, and told me only for a few weeks, so I said, no, the location of the school, where is it located, and I get a blank face. I eventually started naming streets, and she goes, Dove, and she tells me the street name. After the interview, I told our recruiter that she can't speak English and we won't be proceeding further. The recruiter told me that she had spent 40 minutes with her on the phone in English, making sure she understood the role. When I asked her if the applicant said anything more than SI or yes, she looked a bit embarrassed. Story 14, I was working as a front-end supervisor for a big box retailer going into the holiday season. This was the beginning of November. I get this girl who came in for an interview, and I let her know it was seasonal work, but that we would be keeping some of the seasonal hires after January, and inquired as to whether she was looking for seasonal or long-term. In the most stereotypical Valley Girl voice I've ever heard, she replied, "Well, I basically got in trouble for bad grades and staying out too late, and my parents are making me pay for my own car insurance this month. That was it." She just stared at me, expecting her to hire her on the spot. I did not do that. I do still wonder if she ever got a job that helped her pay her car insurance for that month, though. Story 15, I sat in for RA interviews at my college. We had an Eagle Scout come in and take us page by page through a scrapbook about his scout career, page BY, page. It was 10 or 20 pages of him explaining each and every one, taking a minute or two each time. We interrupted him to continue the interview, to which he got a little angry and said he was almost finished. He was able to add a page after the interview on how being an Eagle Scout doesn't guarantee you an RA job. Story 16, I once had an interview at Home Hardware when I was younger. The boss asked me that stupid, "Where do you see yourself in 10 years?" question, and my dumb answer is not working at Home Hardware when I'm 30. It wasn't a jab at him. I kind of rambled about having goals, and that flew out at the end. So the 35-year-old didn't hire me after I insulted him to his face. Go figure. Now, I try and be more present in the moment and less of a... Story 17, I sat in on interviews with a manager at the restaurant I worked at. I remember this application he pulled specifically cause the kid was from the same rough part of town the manager was. The manager comes in on a 5-minute rant on how much he hates scam artists trying to get money off decent people in the streets. Upon hearing this, the kid launched into a story about telling people he locked his keys in the car with his wallet and just needed 20 for Papa Lock. Explains he could make 300 on a good day. The kicker, he doesn't have a car. He laughs while all of us stare at him dumbfounded. Manager kicked him out. He got a job down the street. Story 18, had a girl sit across from me, put her elbow on my desk, then rested her head flat on her hand so that her head was now sideways. She stayed that way through the entire interview. Another time I asked a guy if he had any special skills. He replied, "Keeping it real with y'all." Story 19, I'm not a boss, but my boss was actually just telling me about a woman she interviewed for my job about 6 months before I was hired. She came in for the interview in cut-off jean shorts and a nice top that was more appropriate for the club scene. Anyway, my boss decided early on in the interview that this woman wouldn't be hired. After all the initial cliche questions the woman would answer him, "I'm not sure, they say their goodbyes. We'll let you know," kind of even though they didn't hire her. The following Monday, though, she came in for work. They had to tell her she didn't have the job, and they were still going over all the other applicants. She left, but came back Tuesday and then Wednesday, and every day she came in for a week or two, thinking she had the job. My boss finally had to tell her if she came back, they would call the police on her. She finally got the hint, but she really wanted to work, I guess. Story 20, worst one I had was a guy that showed up and refused to answer any question. I don't know, that doesn't apply to me. So, after 6 questions I asked, "Do you expect to get hired after this?" He said yes. Story 21, I work at a real estate company that designs all of our marketing material in-house. As a result, when we were looking for a new assistant, having Illustrator Photoshop experience was a huge plus. We typically do phone interviews before we ask PPL in. One of the questions is whether they know their way around PS. This guy answered yes, and I asked him for a more formal interview. But he comes in well-dressed, nicely mannered, on time. We go through the motions. When I ask him about what kind of experience he has with PS, he flat out tells me my GF is really the one that does that. I'm not too familiar with that program. He didn't get the job. Edit, don't open Reddit for 12 hours, a personal record. And this is my top comment. Story 22, I had a guy come in to interview for a junior developer role. We were advertising at local universities for current students, recent leavers, and had set our expectations to match. During the interview, I gave him access to a laptop with code examples, one of which would simply have required changing the text in the pop-up box to do exactly what we asked, and asked him to write a very basic script, basically a hello world pop-up box, just to show that he actually knew what he was doing. After 10 minutes of confusion, he asked if he could go home, Google the question, and email me his code. True to his word, he went home, Googled the question exactly, pasted the answer from the top result, errors and all. He didn't get the job. Every other applicant was able to do the test on the spot in less than 5 minutes, as would anyone who had used the language for any more than 5 minutes. Second was a guy who applied for a L2 tech support position. First issue was he showed up 45 minutes early and was extremely impatient. Yes, you can show up too early for an interview. So he started off on the wrong foot. Then told me the reason he was early impatient was that his daughter had driven him because he had no car license. Public transport in our area sucks. So unless you live in one of the surrounding suburbs, you really need a car. Talking over an hour on public transport where it would take 20 minutes by car. He's then telling me about his couple of decades experience in IT as a sysadmin, project manager, IT manager, etc., all of which he significantly downplayed in his resume. Which of course then made me ask him if he had seen the clearly defined salary I had put on the job ad, which resulted in a yes, I saw that, and would expect a significant promotion and double the salary after 6 months. He somehow seemed stunned that the interview concluded after that. Bonus best worst job application I've seen was a person responded to one of my ads with a simple email stating he'll take it, and only listing his name, address, phone number. No resume, etc. Best thing of all was the job ad was posted on an Australian job site for a job in Australia, yet the bloke was from the US. Had he been local, I almost would have interviewed him for shits and giggles. Story 23, I had a guy show up who was a redhead and short. He had a beard, he wore a green suit. It was difficult to interview him with a straight face. He didn't get the job. Story 24, due to some budget cuts, we were forced to replace all of our locally based contractors with contractors in India software dev. We fought but lost that battle. At least we won the battle to have a phone interview with all of the Indian replacements. Management would have been okay with letting the consulting firm dump whoever on us. During several of the interviews, we would ask a question, then there'd be a long pause or even the sounds of typing. If they were too stupid to mute their phone, then they'd read off an answer that was almost too perfect. They were Googling the questions. I think we managed to find a couple guys who weren't terrible, but I don't know if all the vacant positions were ever filled. I started blasting out my resume and got hired elsewhere a month later. I wasn't going down with the sinking ship. Story 25, I had to interview a guy for some contract labor, and when I showed him our work vehicle, he shook my hand and said I'm sorry, but I refused to drive a Chevy and left. I was speechless. He was giving me the story of how hard he is having it. I decided to give him a shot, and because we had a Silverado for the work vehicle, he turned it down. He has 3 young children. Story 26, I applied for a job about 2 months ago, and during the initial phone screening, I told the HR person that I had a Bachelor's of Science instead of a Bachelor's of Science. Still got the in-person interview, but not the job. Story 27, I was hiring an entry-level position. The woman showed up with a gold nose ring in professional setting, mind you, and a moon nightgown on. She then proceeds to tell me she doesn't have a driver's license while she scratched her breast. Story 28, I was interviewing someone that had come to the U.S. from the country I was born in. Throughout the interview, she kept telling me how much better our country was and how much smarter and more educated she was than Americans. I politely thanked her for her time, told her we were looking for a different skill set and attitude, and suggested she might consider going back to the motherland as it seemed she would be much happier there. She told me it was obvious that I had become a dumb American and that I should go myself. It was funny. Edit the country is Romania, since a few people asked. Story 29, I asked a guy when would he be available to begin work if offered the position. His response was that he would have to put down his dogs in order to begin work as soon as possible, but was willing to do that to get the job. We called him almost immediately after the interview to tell him he wasn't selected and hopefully save his dogs' lives. Story 30 in my old retail job. I went into the storeroom to grab something. As another coworker was clocking in, we overheard and then got dragged into an interview my then manager was doing. The guy, for some unknown reason, went off on a Peter rant and lecture on the evils of hunting and how awful hunters are. To my manager and coworkers who just received their deer permits, which he had no knowledge of, he just decided to rant and semi-scream at us and drag us into the interview. It turned into almost a half-hour rant. After the guy left, I asked our manager what was that about. Manager replied, I asked him to tell me a little about himself. Yeah, the guy did not get the job. Story 31, not the worst, but the weirdest. Guy applied for a warehouse delivery position. Had emailed back and forth with a few questions before the interview, and it sounded promising. He comes in, sits down, and says, so, what is this position? Delivery? Oh, I can't lift anything. Also, I lost my driver's license a few months ago. I guess we're done here. And then just got up and left. No thank you or goodbye. Just got up and left. It was the shortest, most bizarre interview I've ever done. Edit, it's hard to pinpoint the worst. I've had everything from girlfriend comes in with him, hadn't showered in a week, to asking who they can talk to about in advance, because they owe people money. He hadn't been offered the position yet. I think the one that takes the cake was the graphic designer that brought in his portfolio of paintings depicting women getting murdered in various gruesome ways. He proceeded to tell us how fascinated he was with murder. We walked in pairs to our cars for a while after that. Story 32. I was working as a temp for a business on the day they were holding interviews for new staff. The business took up one floor of a large office building. Clients and potential employees would press a buzzer outside the building, which connected to the relevant floor business. And a receptionist would speak to them and then press a button to open the door, and they could come into the building and get the elevator to our floor. On this day, I was the receptionist responsible for buzzing people in. All goes well throughout the morning. Then around lunchtime, two guys buzz asking to come up for their interviews. I check their names off and press the buzzer to open the door. 5 minutes go by, and they still haven't appeared from the elevator. They press the buzzer again. I buzz them in again. No guys show up. For half an hour, they're asking to be buzzed in, and I'm pressing the button, and they're failing to open the door. I'm starting to think maybe it's me. But another guy presses the buzzer asking to come up for his interview. I buzz him in, and a couple of minutes later, he's getting out of the elevator. Finally, after almost an hour, well, after their interview slots had passed, someone who worked on another floor was coming into the building and saw the guy standing outside. He buzzed me to ask what was going on, and I asked him to let them in. He says he will, and I wait, really curious now to meet these two guys who can't open a door. 10 minutes go by, then another 10, and still nothing. Finally, almost an hour after the guy let them in, and 2 hours after their interview times, some lady from another floor comes in leading two guys. She says these two have been sitting in our reception for an hour. Thought ID better bring them down. They didn't get jobs. Story 33. I'll flip this around when I worked at a large bank. We had a candidate come in for a round of interviews. One of the managers ate his lunch during the interview at his desk, right in front of the candidate, a burrito. Story 34. For the question of, why do you want to work here? He responded with something along the lines of, well, healthcare is super interesting right now with all the stuff going on in government, with Obamacare and all that. So I thought it would be cool to get into. Since insurance plays a huge role in all that, I figured you guys would be fun to work for. Besides being a shitty answer, my company isn't involved in health insurance at all. We are a property insurer, not health, something that someone would have learned 2 seconds into a Google search of our company. He was an actuary student as well, so he absolutely should have been aware that there's a difference. That was the start of the interview. It didn't improve. A lot of people have been replying with something along the lines of, to get paid, as the answer to the interview question. Yes, we all work so that we can earn a paycheck, but that isn't the type of answer you should be giving in an interview, no matter how honest it is. It also doesn't answer why you want to work that specific job. I will typically find around 5 qualified candidates for a position, and I know all of them want a paycheck. The ones I eventually greenlight for hiring are typically the ones that can demonstrate something beyond a simple desire for a paycheck. As for people asking how the interview got worse, here is the coup de grace. I asked the typical, do you have any questions for me? And he asked which local bars clubs had the hottest girls, because once he got the job, he wanted to wife up his words ASAP and settle down with a family. Story 35. A person I know had someone come in for an interview wearing gym shorts and a tank top, fresh from playing tennis in the summer sun. Another candidate came in with their mother and asked if she could sit in on the interview and help answer questions. The interviewer asked if the mother was the one applying for the position. Without a word, the mother got up and left to sit in the waiting area. Story 36. I work in software development. As part of the interview process at my company, our candidates interview over Skype using a code-sharing website for them to complete a small and relatively simple problem to help weed out candidates who are dishonest on their resumes. In one of my interviews, I started with the usual introduction of myself, my role within the company, so on and so forth. I introduce her to the task and explain that ITLL be on a code-sharing website and that she'll need to follow the link I will send her to access it. I paste the link into the text window and explain to her how to access it. Some people haven't used Skype before and don't know how to access text chat in a video call. She smiles and nods and asks me when I'm done, will you be writing the link on the whiteboard? What whiteboard? I look behind me and remember that, yes, there's a small whiteboard behind me. And this woman was expecting me to handwrite the not-so-short link, and she would read it off the webcam to type it in her browser. No. I explain I sent you the link within Skype itself. If you just click, I'm forced to trail off as she reaches forward and picks up her webcam, which I'm assuming was mounted to the top of her monitor. I get a nice close-up of her as she peers inside the camera, then turns it on its side to observe it some more. I ask her what she's doing. Try to find the link. She replies, dumbfounded. I once again explain that the link was sent over Skype and wouldn't appear behind me, nor on the webcam. She resumes the smile and nod routine as I ask her to follow my directions to access the Skype text chat window. I ask her to wave her mouse cursor over my face until she sees some buttons appear. She takes her hand off the mouse, raises it, and waves it over the screen. I explain to her again that she needs to use the mouse, and she smiles and nods again. After about 15 minutes of a 30-minute interview, She did finally discover the link in the Skype text chat, but she proceeded to type it into her browser by hand. She did not make it to the next round. Story 37 coworker recommended his friend's girlfriend. She was doing okay in the interview, but suddenly she just stood up and walked out the door. She got in her car and called her boyfriend, crying. The rest of the afternoon was calls between her and her boyfriend to coworker, and her staring at her front door with tears streaming down her face. Most of the employees snuck out the back to avoid her. I was parked right next to her, and she stayed for hours so she could be sure to see how upset she was. I found out that she finds any opportunity to get really emotional and manipulate her boyfriend with it. She was still considered a maybe right up until she walked out. Story 38 interviewing for an international sales rep. In a rural area, boss nephew invited himself in, and his question was, "What is your blood type?" I was mortified, glanced at him, then across to the candidate, who had traveled 200 km 120 me for the interview and was better than what hoped for. And you guessed it, best candidate rejected our subsequent offer, and boss nephew said he wasn't suitable anyway. Fucking idiot. Story 39 interviewed a lady who at the time had been a stay-at-home mom for the past 13 years. Her answer to each question was, "I'm a mom. I deal with that all the time," or something along those lines. Didn't actually answer the question for almost all questions. I felt bad for her, really. Story 40, I was moved from my former specialist position in IT and moved to our development team as a programmer. My former boss asked that I sit in on interviews with candidates, as I would be able to ask technical questions. Our endpoint IT manager is a great manager, but not the best at IT luckily. He knows this and surrounds himself with tech junkies and defers to his staff for tech things. Our first interview was with a gentleman from a major company in our town, like a Fortune 500 company. He was a support technician there, and the recruiter said he fit all of our necessary skill sets: Microsoft PowerShell scripting, basic C programming, and preferably experience with encryption. If you can't tell, that position was going to be hard to fill with that mix of skills, so we were flexible on it all. This gentleman comes in wearing sunglasses, not transition lenses. They never transitioned, and thankfully he was wearing a suit. Less thankfully it was green and tweed. Myself and the assistant manager started the interview. Our manager came in halfway through. We ask him what his experience with PowerShell is, and he responds, "I've not used it on the job, but I have read about it in a couple of articles on the web. It's something I'm really excited about." Okay, fine, we didn't expect to get a slew of support techs with deep PowerShell knowledge. So I ask, what about it excites you? The power of the shell? Really? And all that it can do, such as coding. Moving on, we ask what he knows about our company and what makes him want to work here. And he pretty much reads the first line of our Wikipedia. Fair enough. He did some web research. We ask why he wants to work here, and he says, "'Cause you're hiring, and you need good talent." By the way, the sunglasses, they're still on. My manager comes in, notices the Ray-Bans, and immediately closes all the blinds, making the room much darker. Sunglasses remain on. My boss shakes his hand, does his intro, gets caught up on the questions we've asked, then compliments the interviewee on his suit, said, "Boss really loves tweed." We three joked about it a lot afterward. His response, "Yes, I apologize for being overdressed. I just came from a funeral." Before even touching on the latter aspect of that response, the company I work for is a rather conservative and old financial and banking institution. Ties are required for every male on staff, and suits are required for most positions. IT, thankfully, just has the tie requirement. The three of us were all in fine shirts and ties with business formal slacks. This sunglasses hut guy in a green tweed suit just apologized for being overdressed because he just came from a funeral. My boss had no idea what to say, so just asked, "I'm terribly sorry. Why didn't you reschedule the interview?" There wasn't a scheduling conflict. When the interviewee finally left, my boss turns to assistant and I and just instantly asks, "Okay, did he explain the sunglasses before I got here?" And we both simultaneously said no. P.S. He wasn't blind. I put code examples up on a computer screen, and he read them from a distance. He literally just wore sunglasses the whole interview. Never told us why. Story 41, one of the bosses here points out of the window to the interviewee's car. She's about 18F, and he's about 45M. "Is that yours?" "Yes," she replies. "White cars are like clitorises. Every S got one." He chuckled. She got the job, and took it too.